this video, I want to talk about something very important. If you're going to live in Latin America or Asia, anywhere where they don't speak your language, it's going to be a huge game changer if you learn the local language of where you're going to be living. You can get by using translators, and you can get by just having friends of that country. Say you're going to Colombia and you meet Colombians that speak English and you speak English. You can get by with that, but your sample size is going to be minuscule. You're not going to run into very many English speakers, local Colombians, that is. You'll run into other expats. There's big expat communities, there's big digital nomad communities, there's big tourist communities. But if you really want to plug in, if you really are serious about living overseas, you gotta learn how to speak the language. And the best way to do that, in my opinion, is just throw yourselves into the lion's den and just learn. Try to pick up words, try to listen as you're meeting people. Text them, send them texts. Don't immediately send things through the translator, or use the translator. When you receive a text message, put it through the translator and read the words in Spanish, and when you translate it, read it in English. And over time, you're just gonna see the patterns. You're just gonna see, like, everybody's gonna say, "Hola, ¿cómo estás?" Every conversation is gonna start that way. 99.5% of every conversation in Medellin, Colombia is gonna start that way. So you're gonna quickly learn what "Hola, ¿cómo estás?" means. You'll see the same phrases over and over. ¿Dónde estás? Where are you? ¿Qué tú haces? Now, I want to say that my Spanish right now is terrible. That's going to bring me to my next point. But before I get there, yes, you wanna learn the language. You want to practice sending text messages. You want to let people correct you. Don't get defensive. In fact, you want to encourage people, native speakers of the language you're trying to learn. You want to encourage them to correct you. Because if nobody corrects you, like me and my partner, we speak different languages, and she never corrects me. But she knows what I'm trying to say. But when I'm trying to communicate with others, they're like, "What?" They don't like. I use a mix of Portuguese, Spanish, and I'm lazy conjugating verbs. But she knows what I'm saying, and she never bothers to really, put her foot on my neck. Like, "No, you need to say it this way." That's what you want to do. You want somebody who's going to enforce the rules. I imagine it could get annoying at times, especially if you're in an argument and you're not trying to hear all that. You just want to get out what you need to say quickly. But in the long run, you're going to want to be able to speak correctly, because this person who's used to communicating with you will understand. But when you're out in the street, when you're talking to the locals, they're not going to know what you're trying to say. Now, my next point is, say you're a traveler, say you're a person who takes a lot of vacations, and you're not focused on one place. And the classic example is, if you travel to Latin America, you're going to have the choice to, do you want to go to Brazil, where they speak Portuguese? There are a few exceptions, but for the most part, it's Spanish and Portuguese. Now, if you spend a lot of time between, say, Ecuador, Venezuela, Colombia, Argentina, Chile, Peru, Chile. What is it? Chile? I don't know why I say Chile. I don't know where I get Chile from, but anyway, obviously for those countries, you want to learn Spanish. Now, there are a lot of similarities between Spanish words and Portuguese words, but I want to highly advise that you pick one. Pick Spanish or Portuguese. Obviously, if you want to go to Japan, learn Japanese, or if you want to go to China, learn Mandarin, or, obviously, for this example, I'm saying for the Latin American traveler that's going to spend time in between Brazil, Colombia, as I do. I spend time between Brazil, Colombia, Chile, Peru, Argentina, Uruguay. I had a little bit of background in Spanish, but not very much. I'm before I started traveling big time, I was just an English speaker. So, but what I did is I threw myself into the lion's den and just threw myself to the wolves in Colombia and just started picking up Spanish, communicating with locals all the time, all the way out every day, talking, every day mingling, going in the stores, communicating with taxi drivers, just walking in the stores. Hardly anybody speaks English in Colombia as far as Colombians. Now, a lot of them understand English, but they're hesitant to try and speak English because they're self-conscious about how they sound. If you go to Colombia and you think people don't understand what you're saying, a lot of people understand what you're saying. They just, they're not good at speaking it, but they can understand when they hear it. My Spanish got to be pretty good where I could just get into a taxi, have a conversation with the taxi driver. They would always tell me, "Oh man, you understand a lot. You speak Spanish well. You understand everything." They would encourage me to stick with it. And as I went to Brazil, I started to learn Portuguese, and there are many similarities in the words, but learning Portuguese before mastering Spanish was probably the worst thing that I could have done, because that has demolished my proficiency in Spanish, because there's many words similar. For instance, and I mean now just basic words in Spanish, the basic words, I've forgotten them. Like I would have never, when you say you're a native English speaker, you're learning one language. It's very easy. You're learning these words in this one language. So it's very easy, if you just stick with that one language, it's very easy to learn how to communicate effectively in that language, because there's no confusion. Like, you're not going to mix up English and Spanish. You've been speaking English your entire life, so you're just going to think, what's the other word that I'm looking for? Like, if I'm sitting at a table, I know in English it's a table. I'm never going to mix up table and mesa. In Spanish, it's called a mesa. But say in Portuguese, in English, I want to do this now. In Spanish, it's ahora. In Portuguese, it's agora. It's very similar, ahora, agora. And you may think, oh, it's easy to learn them both because they're very similar. I can understand, because I understand Spanish, when people are speaking, I can understand Portuguese as well. Well, where that's going to mess you up is when it's your time to speak, you're going to be mixing up Spanish and Portuguese all the time. If I go to Argentina and I start talking, and I think I'm speaking Spanish, but I'm so programmed into speaking Portuguese that I'll say agora when I mean ahora. And these are very basic words in Spanish, and I'm just amazed at how many words I've forgotten in Spanish. I'll have to sit there and think. The other day I was thinking menino, or niño. I forgot the word for these are basic words, because in Portuguese, menina, menino is girl or boy. In Spanish, it's niño, niña. I could not for the life of me remember these very basic words. Even speaking Portuguese, my brain is stuck on Portuguese. It's very hard for me to speak Spanish now. But even even some of my Spanish has stuck, and I can't for the life of me ever say, like when you want to say with something in Portuguese, it's com, like agua com. That's a bad example because it's agua sin. Or we'll put it like this: if you want to say agua, water, normal water, not sparkling water, you say agua, water without gas. In Portuguese, it's agua sem gas, SEN. But in Spanish, I think it's sin, SIN. That's another basic thing. I had to think, what is it? These are things that you don't even, before I didn't even have to think about. They just came like that. Like I don't have to think how to speak in Spanish. It would just naturally flow like English. But now I have to stop and think for like 5 seconds. What's the way? And it's very difficult trying to have a conversation if you have to stop and think 3 to 5 seconds every time you want to sit between words. So for this reason, intuitively, you're going to think, oh, man, you're going to see the similarities between Portuguese and Spanish, and you're going to be like, oh, I could learn both. Why don't I just learn both? I'm telling you, that is a huge mistake because it's very difficult for me to learn Portuguese because it's so similar to Spanish. It's hard for me to remember which is which because words are so similar. And where that's going to run into problems is when I'm in the street and I'm talking and I'm mixing in Spanish words, and people automatically, like before I started learning Portuguese, I would never go to Colombia and people confuse me as a Brazilian. But now I go to Colombia and I start talking. I want to say mañana and I say amanhã, and people are like, "Oh, this guy's Brazilian. He's speaking in Portuguese," and I don't even realize that's the word for tomorrow, mañana, in Spanish, amanhã. See how things are very, very similar, but they're different enough where they're gonna expose you. When I've gone back to Colombia, I've had a lot of people think I'm Brazilian just because I'm trying to speak Spanish, but I keep throwing in Portuguese words. Sometimes here people hear me speaking, and they're like, oh, he's speaking Spanish, and it might be also with my accent, the way that I try to communicate in Portuguese. I use an accent that's more like a Spanish accent. Like I pronounce words how you would say them in Spanish when I'm not saying them how they should be said in Portuguese. But yeah, that's my big tip, or at least word of advice. Learn one language, master it, become very, very, very fluent in that language, and then move on to learning the next language. Now, maybe if you're trying to learn German and Spanish, you can do that. If you're trying to learn Russian and Chinese, if you're trying to learn two very completely different languages, maybe you can do that. I don't know. I've never tried to do that, but it's a lot more difficult trying to learn two languages that are similar to each other. What's more difficult, Spanish or Portuguese? I will say hands down, without a doubt, 100 to 1, Spanish is easier than Portuguese. Now, maybe I'm biased because in American schools, they try to teach you Spanish. You're around Spanish speakers. I don't think I've ever met a Brazilian in the United States. I've never been in a situation where I hear people speaking Portuguese, but countless times you're gonna run into people who speak Spanish. Living in Miami, if you live in Los Angeles, if you live in Arizona or wherever, New York. I just think it's everywhere now. Like you're not gonna get away from Spanish in the States. They use Spanish words. Los Angeles is literally Spanish, I don't know anything named, Brazilian, or Portuguese. I can't think of anything with a Portuguese name in Brazil. So I mean, in the States. It's very easy, you know, growing up, learning Spanish accents, learning Spanish is just, you know, it's an easy transition to go into learning Spanish. And I mean, unless you're stuck on living in Brazil, staying in Brazil, I mean, Spanish is just better for you to learn in terms of being more useful. For Portuguese, I mean, even in the States, they're saying that in a few years, Latinos will be the majority. You know, not only that, but how many countries speak Spanish? Almost all of South America, Central America, Spain. You can even go to the Philippines and speak Spanish. You know, I don't know where else in the world, but okay, with Portuguese, where are you going to use it? Portugal, Brazil, and some countries in Africa. I don't know where else. So you're very limited. And is that population growing? Are those economies growing? Are they gonna, like, is it gonna be more useful in the future? Oh, I know Portuguese. It's like knowing Latin. I mean, what Latin has no use unless you're just a scientist or something like that, you know, or a geologist, I don't know, biologist, you know, like, where are they speaking Latin? You know, and I don't mean Spanish, I mean the Latin language that, you know, Spanish is based off. So, yeah, for that reason, I would recommend Spanish. Is way easier to learn. The problem with Portuguese is there's these sounds that you need to learn. It's complicated. I'll make a new video about that, but yeah, Portuguese is not easy. I've been speaking it, learning or trying to speak it forever, it seems, and I'm nowhere close to fluent. I go out and I listen to people. I don't know what they're saying. I have no idea what they're saying. So, and when I try to speak at people, I'm like I'm having to repeat myself. People have a difficult time understanding me. So, to recap, if you want to live abroad, you gotta learn the language where you want to live, where you're gonna spend the majority of your time, because that's gonna be a huge game changer. I found nothing is more insulting to these when I travel around, when I go to different countries. When you start speaking in English, people get highly turned off by that. Like they're like, hey, speak Spanish. Like they don't like not knowing what you're saying. And it's just gonna, you know, your world's gonna open up when you can communicate with the locals and they can understand you. Trust me on that. So yeah, I just wanted to put that out there. You know, thinking of new ideas, thinking of new topics. Let me know how you like this video. I'm here eating this Brazilian cake, drinking this Brazilian coffee. Maybe in the next video I put out, I'm going to talk about tariffs and inflation. How I've noticed living abroad. The U.S., you have, if you're living in the U.S. with these tariffs that they're trying to implement, you're in for a big wake-up call because of living in Brazil. I see how it is with these tariffs on electronics here. They pay double. And I say an iPhone, say the newest iPhone in the States is like $1,000, $1,200. In Brazil, it's going to be $2,000, $2,400, you know. So these tariffs, yeah. Guess who pays for the tariffs? The people. You pay. You want an iPhone? You're in Brazil, you're paying double because of these electronic taxes, you know, on imports. And sure, what that does, they have brands. I'm looking at one now, Mondial. And what's the other one? Like Electrolux. are these, I guess they're Brazilian companies that make electronics. So you go into Airbnbs, you'll see Mondial, Electrolux, because those are the Brazilian companies. It's cheaper to, I'm assuming that there's no, import taxes on these electronics. So yeah, it helps those companies. It's true, because I see those brands everywhere. Everybody, it's funny. Like, I always buy Brazilian because it's cheaper. So it is true. Tariffs help the local brands, but if you want that other brand, you're gonna pay a pretty penny, and these tariffs are no joke. So, like, one thing, like, well, I'll talk about that in the next video. But I'm gonna wrap this up here. If you want to hear more about tariffs and living in Brazil in general, check out the next video. Check out this video right here. Peace.